Hello and welcome to a lecture on period 1, and this is going to be the second part of key concept 1.2 part 2. We're looking at B, C, and D in this one. So we left off with Spanish had created their empire, seen in green here, and so moving into part B, the Encomienda system. Here's a vocab word there. Spanish colonial economies, they sort of grabbed the Native American labor to support plantation-based agriculture, sugar, and extract precious metals, silver, and other resources. So the encomienda system, this is from the Spanish word to entrust, and this is a labor system. So the Spanish system of control over the native populations of their empire, where the Spanish crown entrusts the land, doesn't give, but entrusts the land to a Spaniard, usually a conquistador, who had power over the people on that land. And the Spaniard had a monopoly on the labor of the people on the land, but not ownership of the land. The person who had the largest of these encomiendas was Hernan Cortez, the conqueror of the Aztecs. So how it was supposed to work, how it really worked, the Spanish landlord was supposed to Christianize and convert the natives on the land and treat them properly, use their labor, but not in a dominating matter. And the hope is to recreate the feudal relationships of landowner to peasants that existed in much of Europe, where there's protection for labor, and in this one the crown of course still owned the land. How it really worked was abuse of the native populations who were enslaved to extract the silver from the mines or to do the heavy work on the sugar plantations that the Spanish had been setting up. Very abusive conditions in the context of the disease, and the natives often worked to the point of death. So this is how it's supposed to work. This is how it really is work. It's labor. And the encomiendas was the first attempt at many to solving this problem of a high demand for labor. There's lots of land to farm, but there's nobody on the farms really to labor. In time we'll come across this in future lectures. Well, there'll be other systems to sort of solve this problem: indentured servants, various forms of slavery, free labor, trying to attract immigrants, both skilled and unskilled. And it's a problem that isn't really overcome until the early 20th century, when the Americans finally mastered production. So this brings us to part C, the development of slavery in the Spanish Empire. And the problem of labor, getting back to this, really high demand for labor. And why is there such a high demand is the nature of the crop, the sugar. It's in high demand in Europe, so they really want to grow as much as they can, but it's labor-intensive crop. It needs very difficult work to plant it, to harvest the crop, and then refine it from the sugar cane into the fine sugar crystals that we are more familiar with. There are no machines to do this work. It must all be done by human sweat. So who? Okay, well, with the encomienda system, they tried the natives, but that's not working out. The population is too low, they're vulnerable to disease, and they can escape and then just sort of get away. They can try to escape. Europeans are not going to meet the demand. The work is too backbreaking, and the benefits not enough to attract Spanish or other European peasants and lower classes to make the journey, the dangerous journey across the ocean to the sugar plantations. They know the work is hard, sweaty, and dangerous, and when Europeans are going to want to come to the Americans later, they're going to be much more attracted to English, French, or Dutch colonies that would begin in the 1600s. So the sugar lords, the owners of the land who want to grow all this sugar, they turn to African slaves. Now, slaves are not cheap. They need an investment up front, and your slave could die, get sick, run away. But you could also get a very good return on your investment and have the reliable source of labor that is needed. Now, this demand for reliable labor will drive the Atlantic economy. Sugar and slaves would lead to an economic boom in trade across the Atlantic Ocean, but a very heavy cost for Africa, which would be plagued by wars. And these wars have the goal of capturing your enemy and selling them off to the Europeans in a very vicious cycle of high demand for the labor, for a slave. So Africans will capture other Africans so they can sell them to the Spanish and the Portuguese and acquire guns and other products, which makes it easier for you to capture more of your fellow Africans and perpetuate African wars for centuries, as this demand for slave at the top just fuels this into Africa really breaking down into these civil wars. There's a map showing the transfer of humans against their will to the Americas. You notice most are coming from West and Central Africa, and the vast majority going to South America, up to British North America, what's later the United States. There's not a lot, actually, that are directly sent there. Finally, do slaves resist? Absolutely they did, and would resist in every feasible way until the end of slavery in the 19th century, and this is something we'll be coming back to in future lectures. So this finally brings us to part D. The Spanish developed a caste system, or a system of classes, that incorporated and carefully defined the status of their diverse population of Europeans, Africans, Native Americans in their empire. So, and it's a mixed group. Because very few Spanish women are making the move over to Spain, or to New Spain in the Americas. So as a result, the Spanish men, many of them will take up wives or concubines with native women, and produced a very sizable offspring of mixed children called mestizos. And their population really boomed in the port cities and the towns of New Spain. Elsewhere, there's large populations of African slaves and mixed Spanish-African children, known as mulattoes, and then you can get all kinds of combinations. So in the beginning, there's a very simple ethnic dichotomy. There's two. There's the Spanish and the natives. But that disappeared, and a new complex racial and cultural society emerged. A new racial hierarchy developed, known as the castas, and that's here, or the classes. At the top, we have the Españoles, people of pure Spanish ancestry. Those born in Spain were called peninsulars, and those born in the Americas were called Creoles. And it was possible for a person with 1/8 native blood to claim status as a Creole, but not if there's any African blood. Below them, in the bottom of society, we have the sort of the mixed people, or the pure black, or the pure natives. And to give an example of the complexity, you could have all kinds of different mixings here. So there was terms for all the different combinations of people, and for each person there would be different social and legal customs and laws about who could do what work or hold what positions. For example, there's castizos who had one mestizo parent and one Spanish parent. Their children, the child of a castizo and a Spanish Creole or Peninsular, were generally accepted as a Creole and belonged to the top group. There's colos who had one Indian parent, one mestizo parent. There's mulattoes, which is a mix of Spanish and black. If mulattoes are born into slavery, then they're a slave. If they're born, their mother's free, then they're free. There could be a mulatto who's half Spanish, half African, could then have a child with a Spanish. That child would be known as a quadroon. Okay, are you getting a sense of the complexity here? So it's not necessary, or even really to your benefit, to memorize and to know all the terms and the relationships among them. What you do need to consider is that this concept of identity. Who am I? And they came up with all these different ones. I'm mestizo, I'm mulatto, I'm Creole, I'm peninsular, or I'm African. And who are you? You are one of these ones as well. All of this is, this mixed society. They had to think about how they viewed themselves and how they viewed others. And so what became the divider for them and the standard for how you identify yourself and others, was race. And there was a socially constructed hierarchy on the basis of that race. And that also included the many, many people in New Spain that were of various mixes of European and native blood that would elevate them higher than anybody with African blood, who are at the bottom. Okay, so a complex racial hierarchy here, and a lot of mixing, which we will not see in the British colonies or the Dutch colonies as well. Okay, that concludes this lecture. Thank you very much for listening.